Bonjour à vous tous. Alors, vous êtes dans le
Good afternoon, everybody. So you're at the World Anthropocene Manifesto. I have Valérie Disdier alongside me, who's the coordinator of this specific session, and Herrmann, who is here also. So welcome to session 6 of the World Anthropocene Manifesto, and the aim is to look at the challenges that underpin the Anthropocene all around the world, and we are moving the globe around, and a certain number of countries are going to be given the centre of the stage, are going to have the opportunity to speak at a given moment in time. In other words, as the sun gradually goes down, where everybody feels a tiny bit more fragile, we're able to talk about the switch from daytime to nighttime and talk about what's happened in the daytime. Here in Lyon, it's still daytime, the sun is still out, and we're now Anthropocenic. We've entered into the Anthropocene. We are seeing, for example, that climate is changing. We see acidification of the ocean, rising sea levels, the species extinction, the pandemics, the famines, soil pollution, fires spreading, migrations. Everything is changing around us. And whether we like it or not, we are newly exploring our own lives and environments. So we've put questions to people from all around the world. They've sent up to 70 videos. And now we're going to present some of these videos to you today. So we put the following questions to them. From your environments, from our daily lives, from our lives, what do we want to express in relation to the Anthropocene? What is offending our moral consciousness and our sense of justice? What makes us angry or what makes us happy? What are our ideas and our intentions to change the situation? So this is the fundamental idea that underpins this World Anthropocene Manifesto. And since this morning, we've seen people of all ages virtually, from age 13 to much, much older, and also people from many different countries. And so what we're going to do without further ado is show a certain number of videos that concern the different territories that we're going to give centre stage to. So we have Mozambique, Namibia, Romania, Rwanda, the Niger, Moldavia, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Egypt, Zambia, Lithuania, Malawi, and we've grouped them together depending on their time frames at the current time. We hope that they'll have the opportunity to speak with us, and in the future years we'd like to make sure that we can hear everybody. Let's start out with the first video from Denise, and this is from Rwanda.
habaho kudahazwa nabyo nk'abaturarwanda, bigatuma haboneka imirire mibi ndetse n'indwara ziterwa n'imirire mibi ndetse n'ubukene bukabije bitewe n'uko tutabonera imvura ku gihe gikwiriye, bigatuma imiryango yacu idahazwa n'ibyo twahinze, bigatuma abantu bajya gushakisha mu mahanga icyabatunga ndetse n'imiryango yabo. Ikindi, imihindagurikire y'ikirere itera ibiza, igatwara amazu, igatwara abantu, bamwe bakaburiramo ubuzima bwabo, ndavuga urupfu, kuko iyo imvura ibaye nyinshi itwara abantu n'ibintu, inkuba zica abantu n'amatungo, imihanda igapfa, imisozi ikagenda, muri make ibintu bikangirika ari byinshi kubera imihindagurikire y'ikirere. Itera ingaruka nyinshi rero ku buzima bwa muntu. Muraho, ku bijyanye n'imihindagurikire y'ikirere byarahindutse cyane, nko mu buhinzi, kuko ibihe by'imvura byarahindaguritse bituma ubuhinzi busubira inyuma, kandi ni bimwe mu bitunze Afurika. Muri rusange, iyo urebye Afurika yacu, dutunzwe n'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi ndetse n'ubucuruzi, kandi ubwo bucuruzi nabwo ahanini usanga ducuruza ibiturutse ku byo twahinze. Bityo rero ihindagurika ry'ikirere rigatuma dusubira inyuma cyane. Urugero ni nk'ikawa, icyayi, hazamo na ba mukerarugendo, n'ubukerarugendo nabwo buri mu bitwinjiriza. byose usanga bishingiye kuri bwa buhinzi n'ubworozi buturuka kuko ikirere kimeze. Rero muri iki gihe igihugu cyacu gihagaze nabi bitewe n'imihindagurikire y'ikirere ndetse n'ubutaka budahagije dukoreraho ubwo buhinzi ndetse n'ubworozi. Imibereho y'abaturage yarahindutse cyane. Ubuzima bw'iyi minsi buragoye mu bice byinshi bitandukanye. Abaturage babayeho nta cyizere cy'ejo hazaza bafite, ndetse bimaze gufata indi ntera. Ubushomeri bukabije mu rubyiruko, ubukene bukabije mu miryango, ubusumbane bukomeye kuko usanga abakire bakize ku rwego rwo hejuru n'abakene ugasanga bakennye ku rwego rwo hasi. Ibyo rero bigatuma n'ubundi nta cyizere cy'ejo hazaza bamwe baba bafite bitewe n'imibereho itari myiza baba barimo. Kandi ibyo byose bigaturuka n'ubundi ku ihindagurika ry'ikirere. Harimo imyuka yanduza ibirere ituruka mu nganda, harimo amashyamba adahagije kubera ko ubundi umwuka duhumeka uturuka mu mashyamba, bigatuma rero tutabona ubuzima bwiza bitewe n'imihindagurikire y'ikirere. Usibye no guhindagurika kw'ikirere mu bijyanye n'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi no ku buzima bwa muntu bigiraho ikibazo, kubera ko niho ibi byorezo birimo kugenda bituruka. Ugasanga ibyorezo bitandukanye, indwara zitandukanye, turahumeka umwuka utameze neza kubera imyuka iba yaturutse mu nganda n'ahandi hose, ikazamuka mu birere ikangiza ikirere. Ikirere nacyo kikaduha imyuka itari myiza, ugasanga ntabwo bigenze neza, tugize ubuzima butari bwiza. Umwanzuro uko ngewe mwumva, umwanzuro ni uko byakemuka gushyiraho amahame n'amasezerano ahuriweho n'ibihugu byose yo kubungabunga ibidukikije, harimo n'amashyamba, kugabanya ibyotsi biva mu nganda bihumanya ikirere, guhanga imirimo mishya hagamijwe kurwanya ubushomeri, guhagarika intambara z'urudaca, guhindura imyumvire no gukunda ibihugu byacu. Murakoze, ubu ni wo mwanzuro wanjye. Gusa nyine ibi byose n'ubundi bigaruka ku bukene, bigatuma wenda ibi bigiyeho byagabanya ubukene, ubushomeri, kuko abantu bafite ubushomeri ari benshi. Abantu ni benshi kandi imirimo iriho ni mikeya. Ubwo rero n'ababashije kujya muri ubwo buhinzi n'ubundi ikirere kikagira ibyo cyangiza, ntibagire iterambere ngo bagere ku iterambere nk'abandi. N'ubwo buzima muri rusange rero tubayemo, dukeneye icyahinduka kugira ngo tubone uburyo twabona imirimo irambye.
Hi, I'm Keswa.
Bonjour.
I'm 27 years old. Currently, I'm kind of in product creation or kind of new product development. And today I'll be speaking a lot more about the product that I developed. I'm also a gardener, permaculturist, and yeah, you know, I believe in sustainability and the green economy, and I was invited to Germany under the partnership and the university, Aachen University. And while I was there in Germany, we worked on the project, like the different things that we could do. Yeah, you know, that the Aachen students were researching on was the fact that Cape Town, as a city in South Africa is already a water scarce country, so we know that droughts are more frequent, and especially in a city like Cape Town in the Western Cape in the West Coast, it's drought stricken. Through that research, they then developed what you call a wicking bed, a wicking system where it's like sub-irrigation. You water the plants underneath instead of on the top, and that can increase the amount of water the plants can take in, and also it can increase the amount of water you use, because then you know how much water you're using and you know how much water not to waste, because you find that in normal agriculture there's a lot of irrigation, a lot of water sprayed, but a lot of that water evaporates and it is not used by the plants. So there's a lot of waste in water in agriculture. So by developing a wicking system or a self-watering system, you actually conserve water in a drought-scarce country. So you save water by watering from the bottom, and the plants using what they need, and also the nutrition doesn't leach as much as in normal irrigation. So that is why I put so much, especially about the self-watering raised bed, is the fact that it actually can be manufactured using recyclable material, stuff that is usually, you know, wasted, like pallet wood, etc. You can treat that wood and actually design it and make the product out of it. And also, you know, it's part of the circular economy, that, you know, we need a more circular system in the world, not a linear economy where, you know, it's straight and creates a lot of waste. We need a system that is circular, where like our waste feeds back into, you know, the economy, and we reproduce, you know, out of the material that we can consider waste. And we know in countries like Amsterdam and all over Europe with the new Green Deal, like these things are going to come more, you know. So the box is actually part of a circular economy, but also it's part of the green economy, because it actually recycles water that you would have wasted.
Alors voilà deux témoignages vidéo.
So there you have it, 2 video testimonials that you can watch from A to Z if you wish on our YouTube channel. These have come to us from Rwanda and South Africa. Very strong testimonials on agricultural farming practices, viable alternatives in South Africa, and in Rwanda, for example, in this rural territory that we managed to recreate thanks to a Lyon colleague who's a researcher and who helped us to collect this testimonial. Now, we're now going to move on with this conversation thanks to a certain number of guests that we're very honoured to have with us. These guests are online. I'd like to invite Floyd Mwanza, and Pascal Hanse. If you would like to add your videos so that we can see you on the screen, can you maybe turn your cameras on, and then I'll ask you to interact with us. Floyd Mwanza. Floyd, are you able to hear us in English? Now, while we're waiting for Floyd to plug his camera in, we have Mr. Pascal Hanse. So, are you able to speak? And maybe you could give us your own manifesto, initially speaking, and that way we can react to it. You're going to talk about Sudan and you're going to talk about Wales. You work for a French institute, am I not right?
Ah, Floyd, nous sommes ravis de vous recevoir.
Floyd, we're delighted to be able to see you in your car, but unfortunately, we have a sound issue. Floyd, we are live.
Your manifesto, please. En attendant que
While we're waiting for
je
Floyd
l'espère,
to park his vehicle, and I hope he will soon be able to do so and be live with us. Pascal, let me pass the floor over to you. I'll give you back the screen that I stole from you in the middle of a traffic jam. Are you able to hear me? Yes, we can hear you wonderfully well. That's perfect. Oh, it really is so exciting to be able to take part in this day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having given me the opportunity to speak and for having invited me. I, of course, would love to be able to ask you lots of questions. When I was called upon to speak during this wonderfully important day and extremely interesting, I would like to stress that, given all the different conferences I've been able to follow. And maybe rather than giving you some eloquent speech about Sudan, I'd like to talk about the recent history of the country. As you know, it's a big country in Africa. Prior to the sharing out in 2013, it was one of the biggest countries. And I'd like to talk about something that has happened just behind my house. Now, just behind me, you might be able to see that there's a small block of light. It's the most beautiful part of the day where the sun goes down and where the prayers have just began in all of the Khartoum mosques. I live in a neighborhood in the heart of Damas. You could potentially say that, sorry, Khartoum. You could maybe say it's the residential neighborhood. It's the neighborhood, for example, where there are lots of companies, lots of ministries. There's the Saudi Arabian embassy that is not far away, lots of shops as well, the main commercial part. I wouldn't say it's a posh neighborhood because that doesn't really exist in this country. The rich elites don't lock themselves together. But in Europe, we tend to call it a middle-class neighborhood. My neighbor's a doctor, and across the road, we have a family of lawyers. Now, this neighborhood is made up of lots of small brick houses. Very often, they were made of bricks that were then left to dry in the sun, and often made of bricks as well that are a bit more sturdy if people had more money, bricks that have been cooked as such in a furnace. And not very far from my house, there are a couple of smaller type huts that used to house up to 12 to 15 people in the poorer families. And one day, about 14 to 15 months ago, I suddenly saw a number of trucks arrive with a certain number of workers that got out of the trucks, and they suddenly started to destroy all of two of these pretty homes. And today there's just a massive wasteland, and when it's 40 degrees in the sun, for example, we can see all of these workers who have gradually taken away the walls of these homes. They've stripped them to pieces. I'm talking about these two homes that previously were not in ruins at all. Now, of course, I asked my neighbours what was happening, and my neighbours explained, oh, but the plot of land has been bought by a rich foreign businessman. Now, when people say that to you here, that basically means that they're talking about riches that come from the Gulf or from Saudi Arabia or potentially from Dubai. And very, very quickly, the bricks were all recovered by these carriers, walkers and carriers. And today, absolutely everything that was on this plot of land has gradually been picked up and taken away. And now, almost six months later, there's a group of youngsters, a group of young kids, and there's about 12 of them. They've built a hut on the plot of land. They've walked around Khartoum and they've picked up all kinds of pieces of wood, pillars, big beams, and they've built this kind of house made up of cardboard and fabric on the plot of land. Their average age is probably 12 to 14. There are no adults with them, and I see young girls, for example, carrying babies on their hips. They're probably no older than 14, 15. And this community now lives there on this wasteland, watched by people like myself, maybe not well-meaning, not hostile either, with just the neighbours that surround this wasteland. It would seem that these are young people who come from the southern part of Sudan. It would seem that they and their families, or they have fled war, they fled the poverty, and yes, the wars that have pervaded these countries over the last 40 years. There are no latrines. I imagine sometimes they go to the lavatory in the neighbouring cafes, but from what I can see out of my window, it's not necessarily always the case. I see the young lads, for example, that go and collect water wherever they can. That's not the hardest thing to do, because in Sudan, traditionally speaking, access to water is something that is made available to everybody. Even in the streets, you've got massive clay bottles that provide water to anybody who wishes to help themselves. I've no idea what these people, these youngsters, eat. The other day, and for 3 days running, a car from the High Committee for Refugees drove past them very slowly, then stopped. Nobody got out of the vehicle. Then they came back the next day and the next day again. And basically, this small community is living its life. The community doesn't really get involved with the local inhabitants. Once again, as I said, they're not part of our community. They're not discriminated against either. They're not rejected. The children tend to keep way away from the road that goes past our houses. They've got this kind of cardboard bed. This it's like a kind of nest that they've built in the middle of our nice middle-class neighbourhood. And in a few weeks' time, in a few months' time, maybe in a few days' time, I would imagine that the massive diggers are going to turn up, and they're going to build what has to be built supposedly on this plot of land. In other words, a whacking great building, a building that no doubt will be designed so that it can then be sold to people who have got enough money to be able to live in the luxury premises, who can buy an apartment in a new building. So this is just a short testimonial that I wanted to provide you with in a town that has never been designed for this kind of situation to take place. We're basically on the converging point of the two Niles, but as soon as you move away from the Nile River, 300 meters further down the tracks, there's no water. It's very arid ground. All you've got is rocks and sand. People who've got gardens, it's only because they dig deep and because they import the soil. There are certain members of the population who live along the banks of the Nile. There are 8 million inhabitants that live on the river's edge, and here and there you can see contemporary houses that are built. But this is a country that abandons its children. They're malnourished. Yes, the young people that I've seen on this wasteland, they've got mobile phones, so I imagine they've got parents or mentors at least, or people somewhere near here who call them up now and again just to check that they're doing okay. I imagine that they are part of the cohort of 3, 4, 5 million children that don't get enough food to eat. The 40% of people who live under the poverty threshold, the 3 or 4 million refugees, and only 1 million of the refugees are actually listed as being refugees officially, and are taken on board, looked after in the different camps that exist. So I would argue that these young people represent a certain contingent, a certain part of Africa. Nobody looks after them. They're abandoned. They're left to just get on with their lives as best they can in the middle of this wasteland. It's a non-place in this interurban area, and they've suddenly just seized the opportunity to be able to make the most of it in the short term. Here, everything has been recycled. They're not ecological, but basically anything that leaves our houses, the slightest bit of cardboard or anything, is immediately picked up. They do everything they can with it. Everything is recycled. In Khartoum, for example, where the bins are not collected on a regular basis, my neighbours often burn what they want to throw away. As you can imagine, it smells very nice in the neighbourhood when that happens. So it's very rare that we benefit from some form form of public service for waste disposal. And I just wanted to talk really about these young people who've been abandoned in this town, in this neighborhood, that could almost say that it is the capital of Sudan, and it showcases the best of what Sudan has. And yet these young people are living in these circumstances that I've just tried to describe. So there you are. This was the contribution I wanted to make this evening to the manifesto, and a very low-level contribution on what's going on in the country. Thank you very much, Pascal, for this point of view from what you have behind you that is now completely black, completely dark, because now there is not a glimpse of light. We've gone from the sun going down to nighttime for you, it's true. And what's very, very interesting, and I would like to get you to react potentially, if you don't mind, in a few seconds on this subject. I'd like to know, how do you imagine this vision that you could potentially have of a territorial area where they recover absolutely everything, they retrieve everything, and they've made a kind of interstice, something that works in the gap on the verge of society in the context of the Anthropocene? Could this be an idea that could be promoted, or what would you like to say about these kind of challenges and what you're seeing? Well, if you like, what is 100% spectacular is that I've no idea where these kids come from. I don't know what kind of neighborhood they used to live in. Are they refugees? Are they refugees from Sudan? Do they come from a long way away from here? We see young people who walk past and gradually pick up waste from our bins. These are young people, maybe from Darfur. I really don't know where they come from, and to a certain extent, that's what makes their situation so interesting. That's why I was so surprised when I saw what was happening. Basically, whenever you get a spatial area is suddenly freed up, it's as if bees converge upon the space very naturally, and they're extremely inventive. They know exactly what to do in this new space from a very basic, rudimentary perspective. These young people are just so resourceful, and yet I know they've been obliged to move around, that they're obliged to move around 3, 4, 5 times before they're able to find the ideal space in terms of the direction in relation to the sun and the exposure to the wind. In Khartoum, we have lots and lots of abooms. These are dust storms that can be quite major. You have to know how to protect yourself from these dust storms. So we're talking about people who find themselves small havens, gaps, non-places. Nobody tells these young people about these spaces. These are spaces where there are no laws, no rules, where nobody's going to look after the people. It's almost level zero in terms of what society can offer. And yet I would say it's almost a message of hope, because even in the very worst conditions, they find the way to exist. I'd like to know, I do apologize, Pascal, just one last time, I'd like to see whether Floyd is with us. Floyd, are you here? Floyd, is Zoom working for you? And do you by any chance have the possibility of speaking? Are you able to give us another point of view? I am on the set here with the whole team. As you've seen, we have Valérie Disdier and Herrmann. Floyd.
Please, we listen to you. We listen to you.
Okay, yes.
On vous écoute.
Please, I would like to welcome to my presentation. I've been trying to send my video through just to show you what we're trying to present in Zambia. As regards to, in terms of noticed as an architectural firm, but also as a consultancy in Africa, Zambia. So what it is that we're having a lot of housing challenges in this part of Africa, in the sense that most of the conventional housing development is very centered highly on very conventional method of construction. So as a local architectural and urban consultant firm, we're trying to come up with local initiative using the earth, okay? We are using, I saw the presentation from Rwanda. Basically, we're trying to say, if we have the earth, the locals should be able to find the means and shelter from within the local context in terms of local materials. But the issue is how sustainable is the issue, and in terms of material, also in terms of the buildability, and also not just buildability, the quality of lifestyle, the quality of construction. How can that be enhanced in terms of human shelter? Every human being is looking forward to be a better person, to live in a better environment tomorrow, despite the level of economic status of an individual. Every human being is looking forward for comfort. So as an architectural firm and people who are on the ground, we're trying to find local solutions. One, building blocks for the walls. What is it that we can do from the local materials that we are able to build the walls? Two, we're having a challenges with the technology in this part of the world, okay? The roofing sheets, the type of roofing material you're using is becoming a challenge. And you know, the most used material in this part of the world is steel. As we are speaking, steel in Africa is one of the most expensive components to buy, but also is the most widely used material in construction. So now we are saying, is it possible to find a very sustainable means to do roofing? So we are finding local ways. We are going back to train, to learn from how the old school, 1960s, how were the locals able to provide shelter for these rural communities? And we're trying to learn from that. We're trying to learn from that and document it and try to probably be able to provide housing, decent housing for the locals. So we have been doing quite a number of projects. I was unable to upload the presentation, but I'll be able to share with all the participants in terms of how we've been able to provide decent accommodation, decent cooking methods using just waste, local human waste, animal waste, farm waste, any farm waste. We're able to use, we're able to build biogas from local materials, so the locals are able to use how we're able to plan. You know, we're having a lot of planning challenges in this part of the world in terms of the layout for planning purposes in regards to agricultural land, housing land, place of worship land. So all these things we're trying to help in a local context, not only depending on the conventional method, but also using the local context. I'll be able to share this presentation in due course, and I thought I could share this. I don't know if that has been picked, Jeremy.
Ça serait formidable, bien sûr.
That would be absolutely wonderful if we could add this video to our playlist, Floyd. It would be great if you could upload it to the playlist. I'm not sure if you can hear me in English or not, but it would be a great pleasure for us to add that to the playlist. And then all of our listeners here, all of the group here from the Manifesto could take part in this and try and understand your process, your building process. So I'm really very interested in this way of thinking, the way you think about building. You use building and building techniques as something which is constantly changing with recouping material, as you said. You talked about recouping, you talked about demolition, you talked about all of these materials that you can recoup and recover and recycle. And Floyd, you talked about how we can use local materials and how we can recoup waste, for example, human waste even, and animal waste, so as to be able to build with these new materials and to build your roofs, for example, because maybe roofs, roofs are there to protect us. They're above our heads and they protect us from water, air, sunshine. So the roof is a fundamental element of our lives. So maybe I should hand over to my colleague Valérie Disdier, who is here, and she'd like to react to all of this. Yes, because I think that both of you have addressed the same question at the end of the day, which is the question of livability, inhabitability of our planet today and tomorrow. And right at the heart of what you said, we get the impression that this issue that we have everywhere on the planet, it's not just an issue in the African continent. One of the issues that we have is the loss of know-how, and that we're losing these traditional crafts, for example, and also this is something that we are experiencing throughout the planet. So how can we remove housing from its context? How can we remove housing from climate change issues and local know-how and also local materials? Because obviously the local materials that are available vary greatly across the planet and according to the climate. So I think this is really a key issue here. Now, in your respective countries, in your respective situations, have you seen any collaboration processes emerge? Have you seen any issues relating to education and teaching know-how? Not necessarily traditional know-how as such. I don't really like that term, but this know-how which is used on, for example, local materials, with a material library, for example, in Sudan and Zambia, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm not mistaken, you talked about steel as well, and I think more than half of our global architecture is built with raw earth. So this is not necessarily something which is specific to Africa. This is true everywhere. Here in Lyon, for example, we are one of the biggest regions where we build self-built buildings using cold earth. So I think we have the same issues because we're losing all of this know-how. And I wanted to know what you've identified, what solutions you've identified or you think will come to the fore in this front, and how are we going to house people in future decently? As you said, Floyd, you talked about decent housing, and also you mentioned this, Mr. Ponce.
Hello?
Yes. Oui. Floyd, on vous écoute.
Yes, we're listening to you, Floyd.
My network is quite bad, sorry.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Yes, we listen to you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So what I was saying is that, the housing challenges we are having here now, we have come up with the local solutions as regards to design and urban. So we basically we are redesigning new rural settings, new rural households as regards to housing development and also economic support for the local and the rural communities. So what it is that we are having in Africa, basically we have mostly agriculture-based housing setups. So what we are trying to say is the economic activity in the rural should be able to support the people's livelihoods. So now we have people growing vegetables. Now most of the vegetables, it goes to the market, it goes for waste. So we are saying then throwing the waste, the vegetable or agricultural waste, rather the farmer gets that waste, it goes back to his local community, he uses that biogas, he puts that extra agriculture produce for in terms of energy. Okay, we are using biogas in these small settings. Then the biogas, they can use it for lighting, they can use it for cooking, but also, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, they are using it for cooking, they're using it for lighting, but also what we are saying in the local context, are we able to now replicate these ideas and record these ideas as something that can be replicated for other rural communities in this country, try to uplift everyone from poverty into at least to some reasonable living standards. So basically, this is what we've been trying to do because we are trying to say, if we can use the same knowledge, the conventional methods of design, okay, we can probably try to do a small unit of housing, and people, based on their local or economic power, they're able to expand these rural communities, rural households. So this is basically what we're saying. These are very sustainable means, very little technology needed. All they need is simple knowledge, simple technologies on regards to knowledge of how to do biogas, how to produce, how to transmit gas, how to have normal lighting without depending on the electricity from it's like the cities. So I don't know if our presentation has been straight, but I'll try and present it in terms of a PowerPoint. Maybe I can share it to the other participants.
Tout à fait. Et en attendant,
absolutely, why not? So, in the meantime, Floyd, you're just explaining what you've just been explaining is very, very clear, actually, and very healthy, and I think it's very constructive what you have just explained. So, we could wonder why this is not the case. What are the obstacles? What's holding people back? Why aren't we able to do this? Have you identified any obstacles that you could overcome to implement these solutions? Because your solutions seem very intelligent and obviously very desirable for the future. So for you, what are the obstacles that prevent people from doing what you've just talked about, these solutions that you've just mentioned?
The other challenge we have is to have safe drinking water. Every rural community will find the same source of drinking water for humans and animals in the same place people draw water for animals and themselves, for households. And you find we have a lot of these transmission of diseases now in the event of Corona. So our method of improving that is that we are now bringing the shadu, the simple method of pumping water from deep sources. And when you're pumping it, we are using simple filtration methods. So you're basically using gradient. You pump the water up into the tank. From the tank, the water is able to use gradient into the homes. So using simple methods, mechanical methods, we are pumping water from down underground, pumping them to the tank. When you fill up the tank, the rural community of households of maybe 8 houses, they're able to use that water, maybe 5,000 liters of water, and they're able to use that water for a day or two. Okay, so using simple gradient, each home has got running tap water. They can wash their plates. They can draw water for drinking. They can draw water for even the toilets. Now we are encouraging flushable waterborne toilets, then moving away from the pit latrines, which basically pollute the underground subwater. So we've been able to come up with drinking water at reasonable pressure by basically using mechanical methods. You pump it using we've fabricated. There's one where we are using a bicycle. Then it's able to pump water into the tank. From the tank, the water is supplied to the housing. So basically, what you are saying is, if this method, one, water supply to each household, waste management at rural household level, reasonable shelter at rural household level, decent rooms and aerated buildings, will mean most people is very easy to be uplifted from poverty by simple method of design.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe we could ask people to react to this. Maybe Mr. Ponce can react to this because you've identified a lot of problems there. You've described the issues with your surroundings and the obstacles that you see that prevent people implementing these very simple solutions that you've just pointed out. And this is what prevents people from building this decent habitat for everybody. So we tend to be losing all of this know-how, all of these skills, but as you said, we have a lot of brick-built buildings, and brick-built buildings tend to be the norm here, everywhere, not just here, actually, everywhere brick-built buildings are the norm. And when you're in the countryside, for example, you can see that you have these traditional houses with these smaller courtyards, and these houses which don't necessarily use artificial air conditioning, so you have these traditional methods for air circulation. All of this exists, so obviously nothing is too small. It doesn't matter if it's just a small-scale operation. Why can't you just implement this? However, what I'd really like to insist on is that what's preventing us from doing all of this and implementing these solutions in housing? We're talking about economic issues, political issues, access to land. I'm sorry, we seem to have lost Mr. Ponce.
Alors, Monsieur Hanse, on vous entend très très peu.
We can't hear you very well, Mr. Hanse.
Oui, on vous entend mieux là.
Oh, we can hear you better now. Could maybe you conclude in a few words? Yeah, I was saying that the problems we have with regard to these building techniques, that's one thing. But what prevents us from implementing and developing these building techniques? Well, obviously we have travel, mobility issues. People working in deplorable conditions in brick factories. They're absolutely dreadful, the conditions, the working conditions there. So we can't talk about building techniques without putting this into context. And this is the context, the economic issues, the political issues, which is preventing us from developing these techniques. You're absolutely right. Today, it's true that the architectural processes and the different ideas that we might have from an architectural point of view can only be developed in a viable economic system, which enables people to develop themselves based on their own production, their own thinking, their own ideas, and their own know-how and skills. So both of you have identified this. Floyd has a very pragmatic approach, and Floyd has really insisted on the need to develop these architectural processes which should be replicable. And you, Pascal, what I particularly liked in what you said was the fact that we should never forget the conditions in which these processes come about. They're very often marginalized, and working conditions, for example, because obviously the working conditions are far from being idyllic. On the contrary, sometimes these working conditions are deplorable, and then these social classes are put to the fringe of society because of that. So I'd like to invite somebody else now to join us. So I'm not sure if the internet connection will hold out. So we've tried to contact Xola. Xola, who presented his film to start off with. He was talking about that raised bed. Can you hear me, Xola?
To ask you if you're here, can you try to talk to us?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yes, for sure.
So we have an amazing working team in here because they have been managing someone getting on the phone in a direct, in the middle of a drawing, and Xola is in here. And then I have a Bluetooth thing that is recorded. Well, I don't explain to you all the wire, but I'm forced to speak in English because otherwise he doesn't understand. So we can't have a translation moment. Désolé pour les Français qui ne parlent pas anglais. Nous sommes à un moment de...
Sorry for the French people who don't speak English. The connection's a bit fragile, so I'm going to talk to Xola in English.
Apparently, you have been working on an association. Thanks for your video. Can you add some points to your manifesto? We were talking about the local engagement within communities and the way we should actually work with different associations and different people that actually engage also within the agricultural practices. Can you tell us your point of view?
Well, thank you very much for having me, first and foremost. It's my pleasure to be a part of this program at the University of Lyon. And yeah, I think, you know, the Anthropocene, it's a really important topic and a really important debate. So I'm really grateful to be a part of it. And yeah, I'm coming from a Club of Rome, which is, you know, a think tank, and we think a lot about, you know, the issues that are facing humanity and well-being and how, you know, might we find a way out of the planetary emergency. So, yeah, that's the where I'm coming from. And to answer your question around community work, you know, I think the best way to go about it, especially in the situation that we're living in now, is, you know, to focus on spontaneous order, you know, because, you know, we have a risk to global governance, right? So we can't really rely on our government systems because, there's so much faults. We know that power can't be centralized. It has to be decentralized. So looking at communities, creating community action networks. So, inside smaller communities, townships, suburban areas, creating resilience, action within, one's community, collaborating with people, your neighbors, and, finding a way in these smaller situations to build order, it's a spontaneous order. Building, like food security by growing urban gardens. I think that's definitely the best way to go about it. Using, agricultural technology, whether it's, container gardening, all these different type of ways. We really need to concentrate on, food security within our local areas, within our suburban areas, within our cities. We can't rely on centralized agricultural systems and corporations anymore. As we've seen with coronavirus, it's very difficult to actually run an efficient food system. It gets disturbed, in times of pandemics. So that's basically what I can say in terms of food, and in terms of agriculture is really I think the prime example would be Cuba. The country of in Cuba, you see the systems that they've set up, where community gardening. Urban community gardening is something that is widespread, and anybody does it. It's not about who you are and what you do. Doctors, nurses, teachers, school children, everyone, believes in growing their own food and working together in a community to become resilient. And food becomes cheaper because then, you don't have to pay a lot of food mileage, transport food from different countries. It's a cost, and it affects, obviously, the climate and, accelerates climate change. So by actually, growing in community gardens close to our supermarkets, we can have green, eco-friendly food systems that have low food mileage. You can use bicycles to deliver to your local supermarkets, your local, projects such as like schools and so on. So, yeah, that's definitely that's what I have to.
Thank you very much, Xola, for these points where I would say one thing that you were pointing out is this idea of spontaneous development that can be within the frame, because we have been talking about it like with Pascal also, what he actually realized of these self-developing people that actually recycled material in front of him. I just do think within this idea,
I think, am I being translated into French and English?
Keep on in English, then we go towards this translation, we just shift, so like that Xola can understand me. I would just ask a last question about this spontaneous development. Do you think that a spontaneous development or spontaneous factory or whatever could exist only within no frame, because it exists also within a frame? For you, for example, Pascal, and then Xola, can you tell me your point of view? Do you think it's only organic development, or is it within a frame also?
Well, I think as human beings, we're very adaptive, and when we're pressed into certain situations and circumstances where the need for survival comes first, then the need for the economy or the need for anything else. I think as human beings, we can become very optimistic, and we can become very orderly, and we can kind of have a collective imaginary or a collective consciousness very quickly, you know. And I'm speaking from experience because when the pandemic started in South Africa last year in March, you know, a lot of people in the community in Cape Town, we formed a group on Facebook. And so social media also helps in order for us to become, you know, a collective consciousness and to organize in a network.
Okay, Xola, unluckily we have to cut right now. Pascal, Floyd, thank you very much for your participation, and I'm sorry we had to cut because we have many other countries to listen, including Cuba and all the suggestions that you were talking about. Pascal, Floyd, thank you very much for being all there and to giving us strength to think and consider all this idea about what should be the Anthropocene Manifesto from a very local point of view to a very professional, also sensitive aspect. Thanks to all you three.
Yeah, please, we want to maybe you'll give us more time next. Can we do the second part of this program? I think today I was a bit held up, I was a bit busy, so I'm looking forward maybe to another time again.
Yes, and this is an ongoing project. You never have to forget that this manifesto is a moving element that will never keep stopping. So we have to develop it and to make it more and more developed within the years. So this is the first step. Of course, we are a bit draft, but we are all very happy to be there in here today and keep on working together because I think it's the base. Thank you very much, all you three.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Cheers.
Bye.